The Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "You say so." But when he was accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many accusations they make against you?" But he gave him no answer, not even to a single charge, so that the governor was greatly amazed. Now at the festival, the governor was accustomed to release a prisoner for the crowd and anyone whom they wanted. At the same time, they had a notorious prisoner called Jesus Barabbas. So after they gathered, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he realized that it was out of jealousy that they had handed him over. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent word to him, "Have nothing to do with that innocent man, for today I have suffered a great deal because of a dream about him." Now the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus killed. The governor again said to them, "Which of the two you want me to release for you?" And they said, "Barabbas." Pilate said to them, "Then what should I do with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" All of them said, "Let him be crucified." Then he asked, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Let him be crucified." So when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, but rather that a riot was beginning, he took some water and washed his hand before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to it yourselves." Then the people as a whole answered, "His blood be on us and on our children." So he released Barabbas for them, and after flogging Jesus, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the governor's headquarters, and they gathered the whole cohort around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting some thorns into a crown, they put it on his head. They put a reed in his right hand and knelt before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews." They spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. After mocking him, they stripped him of the robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him away to crucify him. As they went out, they came upon a man from Cyrene called Simon. They compelled this man to carry his cross. And when they came to a place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they offered him wine to drink, mixed with gall. But when he tasted it, he would not drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided his clothes among themselves by casting lots. Then they sat down there and kept watch over him. Over his head they put the charge against him, which read, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." Then 2 bandits were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by derided him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who would destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him come down from the cross now, and we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God deliver him now, if he wants to, for he has said, 'I am God's son.'" The bandits who were crucified with him also taunted him in the same way. From noon on, darkness came over the whole land until 3 in the afternoon. And about 3 o'clock, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of the bystanders heard it, they said, this man is calling for Elijah. At once, one of them ran and got a sponge, filled it with sour wine, put it on a stick, and gave it to him to drink. But the others said, wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and save him. Then Jesus cried again with a loud voice and breathed his last. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks were split. The tombs also were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. After his resurrection, they came out of the tombs and entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now when the centurion and those with him who were keeping watch over Jesus saw the earthquake and what took place, they were terrified and said, truly, this man was God's Son. The Gospel of the Lord. Hi, everyone. Happy Palm Sunday. Happy Passion Sunday. Today we are celebrating and mourning. We are going to talk about triumph and rejection, about death and resurrection. Today's Palm Sunday, today's Passion Sunday. Today marks the beginning of the week that stands at the center of our church year. The week that will take us on a roller coaster of emotions, where we feel for Jesus' suffering and are in anticipation of the completion of God's amazing work. It can be confusing why we celebrate Jesus' triumphant entrance into Jerusalem and then quickly talk about his rejection and painful death, all in one Sunday. One answer is that the 3-year lectionary restored an ancient practice of observing the Sunday before Easter as Passion Sunday. The other answer, why we celebrate and mourn on the same day, has to do with an important truth about our faith. In Jesus' journey, in your journey with Jesus, both winning and losing, joy and suffering, being a king and servant, all happen at the same time. Wouldn't you agree? Being Christian makes you not invincible to pain or painful experiences. Not even being Christ does. Living with this duality is an important message I want to give to you today. But to understand it better, let's have a closer look at the gospel text. Our text begins with Jesus standing in front of Pilate in a long scene where Pilate seems to try really hard to avert Jesus' crucifixion. First of all, Pilate thinks Jesus should not have to die. He has no skin in the game and thinks Jesus is innocent. Jesus has many followers, as his entry into Jerusalem has shown. At the same time, the council of religious leaders is against him. Jesus keeps criticizing them, and they fear losing their power. It's a political mess. Pilate fears an unrest if Jesus gets killed, and at the same time can't ignore the religious leaders. He tries hard to make this just go away. His first try is to make Jesus exonerate himself. Say you are not the king of the Jews, and then we can all go home. But Jesus does not say he is not the king of the Jews. Jesus does not take the out. He is given by Pilate. Then there is the spectacle of releasing one prisoner, and again, another chance to make this right and let Jesus go. But the crowd does not choose Jesus. They choose Barabbas. And while this is happening, we also learn about the dream Pilate's wife had. that disperses any doubt Pilate might have had whether Jesus was innocent or not, whether he should die or not. Pilate even lets the crowd choose how Jesus should die, and they choose crucifixion. At this point, Pilate is done with this trial. If political stability means Jesus has to die, then so be it. But Pilate tried really hard to avoid this, so it's not on him. I am washing my hands off this. The blood is on you. And the crowd agrees. Now, here we have to do some work. We have to reflect and interpret carefully, because this verse of how the blood of Christ is on the Jewish community has been used for anti-Semitism. We want to see if we can't give it a different twist. The author of Matthew wrote this verse in light of the destruction of the temple. For the Jewish community, the destruction of their temple in 70 AD was horrible. Now, the first Christians were rejected by the Jewish community and were very bitter about that. It was hard. So, out of this bitterness, we can understand how the destruction of the temple is seen by the author of Matthew as a retaliation for Jesus' death, and therefore writing that verse. But the twist lies in what Jesus' blood means. At the Last Supper, Jesus gives us his own interpretation of his blood, and we can hear a deeper meaning in the crowd's words, "His blood be on us and our children." Jesus says his blood is poured out for forgiveness. I ask you, does God's mercy and forgiveness extend to even those who condemned and executed Jesus? Now, at the center of all of this, the religious leaders, Pilate, the crowd, the trial, at the center is Jesus, the obedient Son of God who continues to not give into temptation. Jesus does not take the outs he is given. He endures the beatings and mockings of the soldiers. Jesus accepts the death penalty. Jesus saves others by not saving himself. He gives up power and status and is executed as a common criminal and dies in agony and lonely. Christians have always been asked, why does your God die in such a violent, lonely way? Because many humans do. Your God knows what it means to be born and growing up. Jesus knows what it means to do chores, to be a child. And Jesus knows what it means to feel God's absence in a moment you need God the most. Jesus dies lonely and suffering. The purpose of the cross is to show how God turns it around. Humanity has done its worst. But what human intended for evil, God intended for good. Because the blood is forgiveness, and dying opens the way to resurrection. So Jesus can defeat death for all of us. Defeat death as the last word. I told you at the beginning how the good and the bad happen all at the same time. In our journey with Jesus, we now saw how that happened for Jesus in his entry to Jerusalem and his passion. Being Christian makes you not invincible to pain or painful experiences. Not even being Christ does. This duality defines our faith. Jesus is king and servant at the same time. As Luther says in The Freedom of a Christian, through baptism, we are both free and slave to none, and simultaneously servant to all. Life means joy and suffering, and why that is so, I cannot tell you. I have no answers to the suffering in life, but I find consolation in the fact that our God knows what it feels like. And through the resurrection, death and suffering is not the last word anymore. But that is what next Sunday is about. Today we are celebrating a morning. Today is Palm Sunday and Passion Sunday. And this made me think about how we share joy and how we share suffering. Some of you did the procession with the palms in their cars and drove around town. I love that idea. You were being saved by social distancing, but you shared the joy of celebrating Jesus' entry into Jerusalem. You shared Palm Sunday. Now many of you are reading or listening to this sermon at home. In the comfort of your house, you are listening to the pain, to the suffering. You are not sharing Passion Sunday. And I get it. I know it's simply because of the circumstances of this pandemic. But what about the rest of your life? I'm thinking about how we share joy and how we share pain. Think about social media. On Instagram, everyone shares their best vacation, their tastiest food, and their triumphs. Do you share these joys with people in your life, maybe on Facebook? But most people don't post pictures of the food they made that turned out looking gross. Most people don't post pictures of their ugly hotel rooms. Most people don't share their failures. I want to invite you to think about how you share your pain, your grief, your failures with people in your life, with the community you are part of. How would your life of faith be different if you were more public about your suffering? Because if you do that, how could that lead to healing? And how would it affect the ones you are sharing your pain with? How can you be more vocal about the one who meets you in your suffering, our King and servant, Jesus Christ, who will meet you in your pain because he knows what it means to celebrate Palm Sunday and suffer Passion Sunday. Amen.